new trend has sprung up recently. A new way to eat, as if eating wasn't hard enough already. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's called veganism. Now, vegans refuse to exploit animals to any degree, which means there are a lot of food products which they don't eat. This includes meat, milk, eggs, and even honey. But more than just meat products, vegans also abstain from many other kinds of goods, such as leather, wool, and silk. Veganism makes three main claims. Firstly, it claims to be better for animals, and this is certainly hard to dispute. After all, the meat industry does kill and harvest the remains of dead animals. But secondly, veganism claims to be healthier for you. They claim the omnivorous diet puts you at greater risk for certain cardiovascular illnesses, and there's certainly science and evidence to support this. And thirdly, veganism claims that it's better for the environment. They say that the meat industry has such disastrous effects on the world that it might be better if we didn't have it at all. Considering this, I looked on the news and I found that there were many bills and policies that were proposed which might either tax meat, restrict the meat industry, or ban meat entirely. I knew that my lifestyle and the lifestyles of many others was in danger, that my choices would be restricted for the sake of the environment. And so I asked the question, what would happen to the environment if the whole world went vegan? To answer this question, we have to consider not only the meat industry and its effects on the world, but also the crop industry. Because any food previously created by the meat industry has to be made up by the crop industry. And therefore, the crop industry will have to expand and its effects on the world will be that much larger. Starting with emissions, both the crop and meat industry release a huge amount of greenhouse gases. The meat industry is responsible for two main gases, firstly methane, and secondly carbon. Methane is created by every single living organism, and in fact, in many cases, the largest contributors of methane to this world are from small bacteria. The meat industry creates methane in two different ways, the digestive system and from the breakdown of the animal's manure. The digestive system accounts for 85 million tons of methane annually, and the manure results in around 17 million tons. Now, while this might seem like a large number, and indeed it's true that if the meat industry were to be removed, it would stop releasing these, the bigger and more important factor is the carbon. The meat industry releases 6.5 billion tons of carbon every single year. And now, this is a huge number, but when you begin to look at where this carbon comes from, you might be surprised. Rather than coming from the livestock themselves, the carbon comes mostly from burning fossil fuels to create fertilizers, comes from land degradation, from fossil fuel use during the feed and the animal production, and it comes from fossil fuel used during the transportation of animals and their frozen meat products. You'll notice that for each of these are all integral parts of not only the meat industry, but also the crop industry. And likewise, the crop industry also creates a huge amount of carbon. And removing the meat industry would just mean that the crop industry would have to step up and create even more carbon, which would not solve the problem. As a vegan society, we'll use more energy than we did before. Energy is consumed in the agricultural industry through two different ways. Either directly through the consumption of fossil fuels and electricity, or indirectly, which comes in the form of the energy used to create pesticides and fertilizers. A recent study of the United States Agricultural Organization found that 29% of energy consumption came for the creation of fertilizers, 24% was consumed through diesel, 17% was electric, and 9% came from natural gases. Now guess which industry accounted for the 29% of fertilizers? Because the crop industry is responsible, this means that when the crop industry expands, we'll be using more energy than we did before when we ate meat. Now, a vegan world doesn't mean a world without the exploitation of animals, because sometimes the crop industry kills as much or more animals than the meat industry. One example of this is in Australia. Crop farmers in Australia routinely kill more animals than their cow ranchers. Every few years, the farmers began a mass genocide of the animals, including mice and reptiles and other creatures, to keep their fields safe. On average, the farmers kill between 500 and 1,000 mice per hectare. And when compared to the amount of food created by a hectare of wheat and the amount of cows required to create that same amount of food, what happens is you find out that farmers kill on average 25 more times as many creatures than the cow ranchers, just to keep their field safe. And this is only counting mice, and doesn't take into consider other animals. If this continues, and if we're not careful about the crop industry, this could mean that even with the banning of the meat industry, this world won't improve, and that in fact, just as many animals will be continued to be harmed. This paints a picture of what the world would be like without the meat industry. We would release the same amount of carbon emissions, we would use more energy, and there's no guarantee that a large portion of animal cruelty by the agricultural industry would stop. Rather than compare the meat industry and the crop industry and trying to decide which one to do away with, I think we need to give both industries the chance to innovate and improve themselves, just like we've always done. Because at the end of the day, I believe that restricting choices and limiting people for the sake of the environment isn't anti-animal cruelty, it's anti-human. Thank you. Yeah!